Welcome to Conceived in Liberty, a Bradley Speaker Series. I'm Rick Graber, president of the Bradley Foundation. Thanks so much for joining us for this special edition of the series featuring the 2021 Bradley Prize winners. It's a great pleasure to welcome Mollie Hemingway as our guest today. Mollie, of course, helped launch and is a senior editor of the online magazine, The Federalist, which has become one of the most influential voices in politics and now has millions of readers. She's also a senior journalism fellow at Hillsdale College and a regular member of the Fox News All-Stars panel on Special Report with Bret Baier. Mollie's the co-author of the national bestseller, Justice on Trial, The Kavanaugh Confirmation and the Future of the Supreme Court. Her latest book, Rigged, How the Media, Big Tech, and the Democrats Seized Our Elections, will be out next month, and we look forward to that. And she's a 2021 Bradley Prize winner. Welcome and congratulations, Mollie. Great to have you with us.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here with you, and I am so honored to be a recipient of a Bradley Prize. Thank you very much.
Terrific. We look forward to the ceremony. Mollie, let's jump in. You've been an astute observer of the Supreme Court, and President Trump's appointees to the court were among the most significant accomplishments of his administration. Yet some of the decisions of the new conservative majority have surprised people. What's your take?
I think there's reasonable concern about the court and unreasonable concern about the court, and that people need to have perspective on all of these things. I do think that President Trump's appointments to the court, to the Supreme Court, are among his greatest achievements of his administration. And you see some people saying that they wish that these justices would be a little stronger or that they would take on additional cases, and that's reasonable. There are also, I think there's been a few true errors in their reasoning in some of their decisions. But by and large, this is a tremendous accomplishment. These are justices who are not behaving as some of what conservatives had gotten used to for other nominees from ostensibly conservative presidents. And that when it comes particularly to issues of religious liberty or tackling the administrative state, they're doing a great job. But I also think it's important that people understand it's not just about the Supreme Court, but about all of the federal courts. And that's where President Trump's appointments really are impressive. And there are some excellent judges at these lower levels who have just done really courageous, tremendous work. And when you're picking someone to be on the Supreme Court, you're usually working with nominees that your predecessors put on federal courts. And so what I think is really impressive about Trump's several hundred conservative appointments to these other courts is that next time that you have a conservative as a president, they will be picking from a much better pool than what even President Trump had to work with.
Totally agree. Let's stay with the Supreme Court. At the outset of the Biden administration, we heard lots of chatter about court packing. Do you think the left's attempts to remake the court have any chance of succeeding, or is that something in the past?
I would say yes and no. I don't think that they have a great chance of truly packing the court. I think that would be too radical, even with how they're trying to push something like that through. But usually court packing is part of a bigger project, which is to control the outcome of certain decisions. Yes. And when people have tried to pack the court before, they didn't succeed in increasing the number of justices, maybe, but they did succeed in bullying members to rule a certain way. And I do think that is something where they would have a much better chance of success and is something that people should be concerned about.
Let's switch to the media. You've been critical of the press, and rightfully so, for being over-the-top adversarial towards the Trump administration while handling the Biden administration with kid gloves. As a journalist, what does this do for the credibility of the media? And is it even possible for journalists to be objective anymore?
I don't think the credibility of the media can go down much more than it already has.
I would agree.
People are not trusting them. And I actually think that's a good thing. You look at how long people have been complaining about media bias. The very first Republican president to complain about media bias was Dwight Eisenhower. And you kept on having people talk about these things. President George H.W. Bush, when he ran for re-election, his favorite bumper sticker was "Annoy the media, re-elect Bush." I think people thought for a long time that the media were just biased, that if they could be improved, that they just needed encouragement to do a better job of journalism. What's different about the moment we're in now is that I think people realize they're doing their job. Their job is not journalism. Their job is propaganda. That's good that people have woken up to the reality that the media are that hostile to conservative ideas, founding principles. And so they're not expecting them to be improved by complaining about bias or pointing out hypocrisy. They actually understand that they are in many ways the primary political opponent of lovers of freedom and founding principles upon which this country has had so much success.
Is there any place the average person can go these days for news that they can trust?
I think that there are. I mean, in my case, I just go with particular reporters. I find a reporter who I feel I can trust, and then I stick with him or her. And I look for people who aren't just doing a good job of explaining details, but also admitting if they get something wrong. The big disparity that I see is that the left, which controls so much of the media environment, is very well funded. They have these large corporations that fund all of their media enterprises, and they can create this massive echo chamber. They control narratives. And people who aren't part of that leftist media landscape are much less funded, much less supported. And so it's important that people who do want to get good information support those media outlets and people who are reporters who are doing a good job.
Tell us about your latest book, Rigged. What's it about? What inspired you to write it?
Yeah, well, after the 2020 election, you saw these dueling conspiracy theories. On the one hand, you had people say that they didn't trust the election and that they thought that, these ideas about, voter systems being taken over by Venezuela or something like that. And then on the other hand, you had this conspiracy theory that everything about the election was completely on the up and up and everything was fine. I didn't like the way that people were talking about it, so I wanted to dig into it. I had already thought prior to the election that the way that the media had behaved and the way that the tech companies had censored discourse, the way that polls were so corrupt, that was a form of rigging the election. And so that's what I really wanted to look into, were the ways that the media and big tech and these fake polls can do so much to harm whether or not we have free and fair elections. But I also looked into the issue of this rapid expansion of mail-in balloting and changing the way that we vote. And what I found most interesting as part of my research was how these left-wing tech oligarchs spent hundreds of millions of dollars to embed into electoral systems. I think it's important that we all can trust these entities that are supposed to administer elections without partisan bias. And by funding in key cities and key states to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, this privatized funding of elections really did a lot to make people feel less confident in the integrity of the election. And that's something that really is a big issue going forward. So those are some of the things I look at in the book, and I'm glad I looked into it, and I'm glad with how it turned out, pleased with how
we saw that here in the state of Wisconsin.
Yes.
With some of that money going into targeted key areas like Milwaukee, like Green Bay, and it really is troubling, and somehow it has to stop. Last question, Mollie. As we all know, cancel culture is an attempt to suppress viewpoint diversity. You've written 2 books now on controversial topics, which is not for the faint of heart. How do we push back on cancel culture?
I think that first and foremost, I don't know, the last few years have been really interesting, where you saw people who were supposed to be in positions of leadership that really lacked courage. And if they do lack courage, whether they're politicians or media pundits or whatnot, they should just step aside, because it's important that when pushing back against cancel culture, that you understand that you are going to be a target and that you have to be smarter than the opposition. I remember thinking when the unsubstantiated allegations against Kavanaugh came out, for a lot of people, they just looked at that and thought, well, this is kind of typical for what the left does. They remembered what it was like to go through the Justice Thomas hearings or the Robert Bork hearings. And so when it happened with Kavanaugh, they weren't so surprised. Other people, they seemed to almost be scared or worried about, how much work it would take to push back against these media narratives. So courage is important. And also, I think people need to understand just how powerful their numbers are. One of the things about the left controlling the entire media environment and so many institutions, they give an illusion of having numerical power that they don't have. People need to just trust in the common sense and understand that many of their fellow Americans do not share this groupthink that the media pretend everybody shares. And there can be a confidence that comes from that, and knowing the importance of just speaking out on behalf of your fellow man who's being persecuted by these mobs who control elite institutions.
Mollie Hemingway, thanks so much for joining us today. As always, we appreciate your thoughts and your perspectives, truly valuable. And thanks for all the great work that you're doing. And as always, thanks to all of you for joining us on this episode of Conceived in Liberty.